the 6th day of December 2022. Welcome, everybody. I'm your host, Dana Durnford. You can call in 709-589-4406. Hope everybody had a good day. Away we go. You never believe what nuclear's up to now. If you've been around, you probably will, but you got a doozy. You can count on the nuclear industry. Years and years ago, I thought the International Atomic Energy Agency had our backs. Yeah, I was gullible. I know. Now we know they're the persona of evilness. There's not a shred of goodness in that massive organization. This is the United Nations, of course, right? So to your left, that's where they're dumping bags out that they picked up. And to the right, that's where they're telling them, get lost, slave. They picked up over 30 million one-ton bags by 2015. By 2015. Let me double check. Yeah. And by this year, they're claiming...
There's about 60 million tons.
Let me do that again. I turned the volume down because I thought it was going to be loud, but...
There's about 60 million tons of contaminated soil that's being stored, planned to be stored, outside the Fukushima Daiichi perimeter fence. So,
outside the nuclear power plant's fence. But that doesn't do it justice. There's 150,000 sites in 2014 of piles of one-ton bags of radiation across the entire prefecture, not just outside the fence. And so separate from the nuclear power plant, which is an absurd amount of radiation itself. So this headline today, and I was looking at it, I was, that can't be real. Nobody's that evil. Is anybody that evil? Can people actually be this evil? Reuse of decontaminated soil to be tested outside of Fukushima. Well, look, if you can grow food in it 2 miles from the nuclear meltdowns, which is what they're doing, why are you talking about words testing? You're just going to go ahead and do it. This big disease factory. Japan's Environment Ministry is planning its first trial outside the captured prefecture from the nuclear industry on the reuse of soil that they're talking about millions and millions of one-ton bags. Estimates are up to 60 million. Let's just say 30 million, which is 2015. They didn't stop picking up bags, in 2016, 17, 18, 19, and 20s. Yeah, it's probably 60 million one-ton bags. So they're claiming the soil is decontaminated. I got a problem with that. You can't decontaminate soil that's radioactive. You can't decontaminate anything that's radioactive. Hence the word Wigner, where it breaks down, like on steel, for instance. It'll actually break down the integrity of the steel on the atomic level. No pun intended. It's so, like, why would you do something? Why would you reuse the soil that's you picked up because it's around 100,000 becquerels a kilogram, and you picked up 1,000 kilograms and put it in a bag? and it's not going to break down for millions of years, the majority of it. Forget cesium, and there's a lot of it, so, but forget it. And forget the iodine, there's a massive amount of it. There's another 998 isotopes you need to worry about. Soil exposed to radioactive fallout, which is really unusual to hear those words, radioactive fallout, from the accident, which is, they built it on a fault line where they also have a 3,000-year history of tsunamis, at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant has been cleansed. Well, you can't cleanse this stuff. That's absurd to suggest you did. You're not providing any evidence. Yeah, we put it through the giggling pin, it came out the laughing shaft, and everything is pretty spiffy, Dana. No, they're not providing you anything. They're just... I got a poll to try to help articulate the madness. Should radioactive soil from nuclear meltdowns be used to grow food? Maybe you should. I don't know. What do I know anymore? It doesn't seem to matter what I know. They're going to go ahead. Like, if you want to predict what nuclear is going to do next, think about the most unlikely scenario and then multiply it by 10 times worse than that, and this is what you're going to end up with. And kept in intermediary storage in the prefecture. So what do you got to store it for if it's cleansed? You can't cleanse radioactive soil. It's absurd. It's like... This is not like splinters in your finger or something. You can pull the splinter out and have a nice day. Give me some kind of context. You don't have to get in the bag to get radiated. You just got to go close to it, walk past it. And so all of these bags that are grouped together, and there's absurd amount, they radiate each other. You can never clean it up. The radioactive fallout is constantly still coming out. And the area where they're allegedly doing it is in a no-go zone because it's too radioactive. So if we were on trial, these people will get hung or spend the rest of their life in jail. Preferably both. I'm not particular about the order. The government plans, the nuclear industry plans to reuse the soil for public works projects as long as the concentration of the radioactive substances fall below a certain threshold. So they're not going to use anything in the shops. They're not going to cleanse everything in the shops, make people come back open their shops up because it can't be done. We have terrorism laws because a small bit of radiation spread over a distance can contaminate an area for a very long time. I'll give you an example of it. I don't know why, but I'll give you an example of it. Doesn't matter if I do anything. Will the truth ever matter again? We lost the planet to idiots. They're known as nuclear scientists. I don't even know where to start, to tell you the truth. Because the story is so batshit crazy, right? I'll do the best I can. Which is generally pretty good most times. Yeah. So many lawyers in the industry, too. So, because this is man-made, a single atom, which is considered out of Becquerel, can make you sick in increments over decades. But if you're breathing it and drinking it and eating it, washing in it all the time, then it's biomagnification. And we'll get to that. So 37 billion becquerels in a curry, and up to 140 curries in a gram. So 140 times 37 billion is 6 trillion atoms that are very harmful to all species per gram. And so reactor 3, for instance, is millions of pounds. So divide that into that. So 104 curries, which is less than a gram, is enough to contaminate a square mile. Like New York Park or whatever the case may be. When you release a lot of it, and if you're eating it and all the other species and animals and you're drinking it and all your food is contaminated, it starts magnifying really fast. And every single becquerel atom in your body, your body attacks with white blood cells is less red blood cells, which are carrying oxygen nutrition. And so the magnification, as you go up the food chain, like fish, like shellfish, each shellfish will bioaccumulate 115,000 times more than the fish will, because the clams and mussels and oysters and scallops and abalones and everything else are filter feeders. So they're really good extracting the radiation out of the water. So eating something like that can be a catastrophic event, cause a heart attack the same day. So 500 days just ingesting 10 becquerels per day is a lot more than what they're saying there. But they're saying your body will have an activity of 1,400 becquerels. Well, each one of them is under siege with white blood cells that your body is trying to build a tumor around. It could take decades. Because there's so much in your body, if you keep consuming it, bioaccumulating it, you have no oxygen because you displaced all your red blood cells. And you were producing so much white blood cells, they call that leukemia. And eating radioactive food is a good way to get leukemia or rare cancers. And it sequesters in your muscles, organs, your bones, your thyroid glands will get saturated. They start producing, and not just iodine, but cesium will accumulate in your thyroid too, right? Gammas. And your body is producing radioactive hormones on top of the fact that you have very few just barely enough red blood cells to function. And your overproduction of white blood cells, which are not supposed to be unless you have a catastrophic event, right? So like you cut your finger, it saturates with white blood cells, repairs the cut in your finger, and your red blood cell counts will come back up, because every time you got a white blood cell, you got to get rid of a red blood cell. This is 2015, I believe. They're harvesting food right alongside of 1-ton bags of radiation. And that kind of a picture shouldn't exist, yes? So they're talking about creating earth mounts, have so far only taken place in Fukushima, to grow vegetables, which they've been doing in Fukushima. And we covered a story 2 shows back where they got a guy traveling from Idiot to Futaba each day to check on his farm, that he's now ready to harvest broccoli to ship to market. But no one lives in the town, but they're growing food in the town. And that's... Can you imagine the headline saying radioactive soil from Hanford in Washington to be used in new farmland? right? The outcry would be astounding. But they're shipping the food to your supermarkets. So it's the same thing. Have so far only taken place in Fukushima, which is a nuclear wasteland. Everywhere you go, you got to drive past millions of one-ton bags to get anywhere. Environmental Minister Akihiro told reporters on Tuesday's ministry hopes to use the experiment to confirm the safety and gain public understanding for the recycling of the absurdly radioactive soil. Now, the reason they picked up the soil is because it's so radioactive. So everybody stopped looking. Now they're just going to grow food in it and everything else. A law mandates the disposal of the decontaminated soil, not the reusing of it, outside of Fukushima by 2045. It's 23 years away. It remains unclear how this will be achieved, so let's grow food in it while we're waiting to make up our mind. They're actually just burying it in the ground so it ends up in the water tables. The bags are only meant to last a couple of years. It's wrong. It's not acceptable. And the fact that the world and the nuclear industry worldwide has promoted it instead of condemning it means they're going to war against you. Means they hate your guts. Means there's nobody in control, only the most evilest imaginable. And they're even eviler than you can imagine on top of that. Tries to reuse the soil to grow vegetables. But why would you do that? You didn't put it in a bag with the thoughts that you're going to grow vegetables later on. Right? The new administration says, well, what are we going to do with all these bags? And some idiot says, well, let's grow food. And they're like, okay, let's grow food. I said so the nuclear industry, right, should be stuffed in these bags. Everybody in the nuclear industry should be disposed of in those bags and just forget about them. They're worthless humans. They're now making every effort to poison you and your loved ones. That's criminal. And are we going to sit there and take it? Are you going to sit there and take it? Are you not going to speak out about it? Are you not going to condemn it? Are you not going to try to hold them responsible or accountable? Well, when I go to sleep at night, I don't have those thoughts in my head because I try, right? Now, if we had 1,000 people trying, they wouldn't do it. There's zero possibility of me doing it. They're only doing it because they're so evil, they no longer understand good and bad. Or being good is not an option. They're having so much fun being evil that that's all they want to do. Evil is the only thing on the table. I just can't sit in silence because the implications of using this and poisoning people. And where do they draw the line? Because as long as you don't speak out, it gets worse each day and every day. The silence is what empowers them, emboldens them, motivates them. And because they wouldn't do it if they feared there would be a repercussion, which means the whole system is out to harm the species on the planet. They succeeded already, but they're just not going to sit back. They're just going to try to find better ways and quicker ways to exterminate the population and the species. Species don't have a voice. You do, but the species don't. The ministry says the demonstration will take place at the National Environmental Research and Training Institute, even scarier again, near Tokyo. So they're going to bring the soil to Tokyo. You got to go past all the shelters they put there to put the victims into. these little boxes that they rent out to the victims who can't go back to their homes. Not a single, so go back to 2021, March to 28. Not a single prefecture backs the reuse of radioactive soil. Not a single prefecture. There's a stunning picture in the background, yeah? On March 28, 2021, not a and they're burying the radioactive soil in a no-go zone where you're not supposed to be in the first place. They buried contaminated soil after it was transported to the interim storage facility for radioactive soil that straddles Okuma and Futaba, which are both within a couple of kilometers, both sides of the ongoing multiple nuclear meltdowns. Would you let your kid play there? Would you, if you don't have kids with you, let your loved ones, your nephews, your nieces, your pets, your hamster, would you let them play in this environment? No. Hopefully. Well, because you won't, they're going to move it to where you're to and poison you that way. Think of that. The central government planned to reuse mountains of contaminated soil generated from cleanup of a nuclear disaster got a muted response from other prefectures because they got to drive past this stuff all day. The survey of the nation's prefectural governors, with the exception of Fukushima demonic demons, found zero support for the reuse of contaminated dirt from farmland development or road construction projects. The survey of the national prefecture government, with the exception, I just done that, 5 governors, Yamagata, Yamanasaki, Nagasaki, Kagoshima, and Okinawa, flatly expressed opposition to any reuse, regardless of the projects the government has in mind. And the governor, Shizuoka, opposed reuse of radioactive dirt from farmland development. Like, just somebody even saying that is like someone just come up and punched me in the gut. Opposed the reuse of radioactive 1-ton bags of dirt for farmland development. Farmland development. Like, whose idea was to suggest that it could be used? Where, what's the point of having universities? What's the point of having professors? Shouldn't we burn all of these places down? Because obviously they're worthless. Kids can go to university online. You don't need the institutions no more. They're institutions of evil. They're schools of mass destruction now. They sit in silence when the most hideous of hideous crimes are perpetrated. That's evil. They're all fucking mad about North Korea, right? But the real, which has never attacked anybody in over 70 years, and the United Nations burnt the whole country to the ground with napalm in the 50s. So the governor opposed the reuse of radioactive dirt for farmland, not the professors, not the academics, not the universities, the governor. Because the university, use it, yeah. What do you want me to sign off on? Well, the governor of Shiga refuses to contemplate its use for even road construction. You can't go back to your communities. But we can grow food in the dirt there and eat it. Well, you can. Like, have we been taken over by an alien race? Is the nuclear industry an alien race? Because that would make sense. Because I can't comprehend humans doing what they're doing. All the other governors stood on the sidelines citing doubt about the safety of the soil and their preferences not to answer the survey shows. Topsoil was moved during cleanup operations by the homeless and the destitute and the victims of society and the immigrants who don't speak the language. In municipalities affected by the 4 meltdowns and 8 fuel pools that detonated at the Fukushima #1 nuclear power plant. Every time I see the word triple nuclear meltdown, it offends me. because we have the evidence, and the evidence is crystal clear. Well, if you're a human, it is. I'll tell you two of the most blatant examples. Does that look like a 190-foot building to you? Because that's where the fuel pools were at the top of the building. Up where I got piece of shit Arnie Gunnarsson talk. So when you look at that, it's clear there's no fuel pools or reactor cores, and this is the stump of the mixed oxide reactor 3, and it's clear there's no fuel pools and no reactor cores. It's clear. It's not up for debate. And so we should take all the professors and academics to remain silent and put them in helicopters, fly them over this, and throw them out on top of it with no parachutes. That makes more sense, because their silence is why we're in this position in the first place. The government is required by law to dispose of the polluted dirt. So disposing of it doesn't mean growing food in it or making projects out of it. It's radioactive. Let's bring it all to the diet in Japan and dump it on their lands. You'll be arrested for terrorism for setting off dirty bombs, right? If this was in Canada, that's what I would be doing. We'd get 1,000 truckers together, we'd fill it up with 1-ton bags on each truck, and we'd drive up and we'd just keep dumping it. And if the cops come and try to stop us, we'd make snowballs out of the dirt and throw it at them, the dirty bombs. Okuma and Futaba, the towns that co-host the reactors. We covered a story 2 days ago of Futaba. I'll cover it again, a little bit of it. Where they're growing food 2 kilometers away from multiple ongoing nuclear fuel pools and reactor cores that have melted down. Where nobody lives. Are home to the interim storage facility for some of the soil. They moved it there, and it just doesn't seem possible to. Only soil measuring 8,000 becquerels a kilogram will be reused. 55 becquerels per cubic meter at a nuclear plant free Fukushima was an evacuation zone. 8,000 becquerels per kilogram, which is 500,000 becquerels per square meter, will be reused to ensure the annual radiation doses from exposures are too low to affect human health, or too low. Like they're in the bag because they affect human health. So now we're going to take it out and grow food and say it's safe. How the hell did we ever get to this point? How many failures along the way? And who are these creatures that are making up this stuff, and why doesn't the media quote those people? This is a 5.5 or 550,000 becquerels a second disintegrating per square meter where they're going to grow food. So the food, even if the food doesn't uptake radiation, which of course is impossible, it's still being pounded with radiation. So it destroys all the nutrients of the food, and by proxy it becomes radioactive. Like, you can't grow food without it uptaking radiation. It'll make me do this the hard way. It's okay. I just want to try to drive the point home. So I'm just going to show you a couple of studies. Accumulation of radiation by plants as a monitoring system. how foliage and root uptake cesium and strontium and zirconium in tomatoes. These are studies showing you the food sucks up the radiation. Cesium in the potatoes, and the spuds, and the fruit trees, uptake of radionuclides. What is it you need to convince you? Tell me, because I'll go get it for you. What part is missing from this equation I'm bringing to you? So wheat sucks up radiation. Vertical soil transferred by a tree root system of cesium sucking up radiation. The meadows ecosystem sucking up radiation. So like when you see all these studies, it's kind of mind-boggling. How the hell did we ever get to where we are now? How did we get to the point where the government, claiming the government is required by law to dispose of the polluted dirt? It's radioactive, period. It's not just radioactive particles distributed through it, it's radioactive. We'll get there. Where did I leave off? Yeah, 500,000. Well, gathered at the facility expected to reach 14 million cubic meters. At just that one facility they're talking about. The central government plans to use 80% of the overall soil stored there after concluding it was unrealistic to expect the government to dispose of all the radioactive dirt. It's unrealistic. So if you actually had a terrorist attack with dirty bombs, the government's going to say it's unrealistic for you to expect them to clean up the city. So get back in your houses and sick and die. But like the central government is such a broad term. It wasn't the central government, it was somebody. And so why not tell us what their name is so we can use pictures of them for target practice like a normal person? It is promoting the reuse of relatively low-level radioactive dirt for farmland development. Why would you use it in farm? That should be the very last thought to cross your mind. Why would you use it for farmland? Out of all the options, how the hell did you come to that one? Who is it that's so evil that they actually thought that one up in the first place? Because I'll get on a plane, go down there, and crack their fucking head open if I can figure out who it is. When asked in the survey if their prefecture may become the final disposal site, 8 governors rejected the idea outright because they're not monsters, like the people that suggested. Why clean it up in the farmland if you're going to use it for farmland? So this was 2 days ago. This came out on Friday. I covered it 2 days ago on Sunday's show. First crop since nuclear accident to ship from evacuated nuclear wasteland that's joined on to multiple nuclear meltdowns a couple of kilometers away from it. But he drives back and forth each day to get into the nuclear wasteland to grow food. And that's actually part of what it looks like. Because it's an interim storage site. It's an abandoned city, community, that's 2 kilometers away from nuclear meltdown, but you can grow food there. And they did, and they will, and they are, and then they're going to send it to market. And every nuclear scientist is out there applauding them. Every nuclear professor, every pro-nuclear university is out there laughing it up. Not one of them. There's not a single dissenting voice from a single academic of any discipline worldwide. Not one. Like, pre-Fukushima, the idea of that picture existing, there's nobody, no matter how wicked they are on the planet, would have dreamt that one up pre-Fukushima. So only the Japanese can be this evil. They've taken evil to a whole different level. If I was the president of the United States, the next international nuclear meeting would get a surprise. These people have decided they don't want you on the planet. And they're going to do everything they can to murder you. This is Al Jazeera talking about 30 million one-ton bags. First shipment of agricultural products from Futaba, 2 kilometers away, and the farm is surrounded by one-ton bags. He's shipping to market. He had to go past millions of one-ton bags through ghost towns to take that picture. That's why you can go surfing, by the way. So there are some pretty stupid people that defies any kind of logic. But to take the bags, pick it up on the farmland and move it to another place to grow food on it, I can't wrap my mind around that kind of evil. Right? There's nothing in the jails compares with this kind of evil. We don't have any crimes in history that can compare with this kind of evil. This is just, there's poison everybody, including my own children. Can't even go to the graveyards. Is this not evil? Is that not the epitome of evil? Should radioactive soil from nuclear meltdowns be used to grow food? Everybody seems to agree this is a terrible idea. We're told that land will be left barren and untreated by decontamination work. If this means it'll be restored, because they're going to grow food in a nuclear wasteland, have no choice but to accept it. If the district didn't accept the nuclear radioactive soil project to grow food in, the reconstruction base would have been left as it was. So they went out and looked for someone real stupid and interviewed them and then just say, yeah, well, there you go. That's a whole different level of stupid. That works perfect. Let's put that story out there. Here's the environmental minister. To test grown veggies on cleansed soil, you can't clean it. That's why it's in the bags. It's like there's no evidence that they can clean it anywhere on the entire planet. Nothing. They never even suggested there's evidence. The environment minister in the center, I can't remember whose kid he was, but his dad was a politician, inspects a test project on reusing soil decontaminated following the nuclear catastrophic event on farmland in Lydia, Fukushima Prefecture. Despite the strong opposition, the ministry will soon start a trial demonstration to confirm the safety of growing crops in soil. Many people are opposed to reusing the soil, saying it will spread contamination, and it will, of course. So why are you picking it up in a farm just to move it to another farm to grow food in? At the start, the end of May of last year, will be conducted in a no-go zone, what they call a difficult to return zone, which is a no-go zone. That's a new phrase they invented, difficult to return. It's a radioactive wasteland. where radiation levels remain high. And just walking past it, you're going to get a serious dose. The ministry initially planned to revise a related ordinance in April to enable the soil to be reused, saying it obtained results to show the soil was safe enough to be reused for growing crops. But they don't tell you where the results are, or who certified it, or anything like that. But farmers and ranchers have had to battle negative publicity. Try wrapping your mind around that statement. About their product, all this time have had mixed feelings about how consumers and overall market will react to the move that will begin for that year, last year. Well, they're growing it in a nuclear wasteland and they're surrounded by 1-ton bags. Now they want to grow it in the dirt from the bags. Plans call for making Fukushima product available every day at the cafeteria within the athletes' village for the duration of the Tokyo Olympics. After the Olympic organizing committee signed off on the request by the Fukushima Prefectural government. So the Olympic Committee signed off on growing food in nuclear wasteland, and that's the only food they're going to feed the athletes. The best the world has to offer is give them the radioactive food to trick the world into thinking that Fukushima food was okay. So go down and mark on all of these bags that Dana is wrong. Dana's full of shit. Dana don't know nothing. Dana's leading you. You should eat the food. It'll make you turn into Spider-Man and the Hulk and the Wolverine and stuff like that. In July 2011, cattle in Fukushima were found to have radiation levels exceeding the government standard of 500 becquerels per kilogram, which in 2012 was reduced to 100 becquerels a kilogram, because everybody got cancer. There was 865,000 extra cancers in the first year because you were murdering everybody. With 500 becquerels a kilogram. So like just this much fallout is a catastrophic amount. There's 150,000 sites like that in 2014. They didn't stop picking up bags, they're still picking them up. From this harvest year, a few bags of rice for each of the 400 municipalities will be randomly tested for radiation. The municipalities are these places, nuclear wastelands. And prefectural government officials, aka the stupidest people that they could find, visited his ranch once a year to test the feed for the radioactive material. And they never found nothing in recent years because they're not testing it. If you're going to test it, you test it every day. Who raises, and where they're raising the cattle, the mountains are covered in radiation. The 64-year-old rancher noted that almost no decontamination has been conducted in the mountains. So this is not decontamination, this is just 3% of the land. And the reactors are still melting down, spewing radiation into the environment. While the average price of Fukushima rice is recovered to a large extent, is mainly due to the fact that much of it is for commercial use rather than personal. So rice for commercial use is sold to restaurants and hotels and companies that produces bento box lunches, which is ready, like going buying Kentucky Fried Chicken or whatever, like ready-made fast food, and were simply labeled as domestic. So they didn't stop growing food in the nuclear wasteland. They just disguised it as commercial, so people didn't know where it came from. And who uses the restaurants in Japan the most? It's the tourists, right? And what do the tourists do? They go back home, get sick, and die. It gets worse. The prefectural government set a target of obtaining the largest numbers of GAP, which is an acronym for Good Agricultural Practices in a Nuclear Wasteland. Certification in Japan since 2017. The prefectural government has begun a program. The government subsidizes all costs associated with applying for the certification. And it also established its own certification. So the very people that are perpetrating the crime are also in charge of quality control. Prefectural government has also taken extra efforts to guarantee the Fukushima sake labels win the gold awards given out each year. Well, if that's not a set of stacked dice, what actually is? And every academic, every scientist, every university, from every discipline worldwide is kept silent. And promoted it, no doubt. The National Research Institute of Brewing, as well as the most rice brands receiving the highest taste rankings. So it's complete control opposition for everything. The awards are going out to Fukushima so they can promote it, despite the fact that it's impossible for it to be healthy. You know, you can pretend all the evidence doesn't exist, but you can't. So rather than having the prefecture say the food is safe, having a third party that's controlled by the prefecture say the food is delicious, which is not how you measure radiation, because you can't taste it, is the best evidence for making such a claim. So the prefectural government official in charge of the distribution of farm products. So in Japan they hang people, right? Which is obviously what should happen to him immediately. He should be hung for what he's doing without delay. Should be arrested. The world should be screaming for him. And you should just cut his head off and then play soccer with it. Stick it in formaldehyde for a little while to preserve it. Make it tougher, then play soccer with it for a few years. For most shipment restrictions, because that's just what they're doing with you. I couldn't do that with somebody's head, by the way, but that's what should be done with it. Which is probably what they do to each other, no doubt. Most shipment restrictions were lifted within a year of 3/11. Canada gave up the goose after 93 days. Most shipments were banned for 55 countries for a decade, except for Britain. Britain removed restrictions on baby food and cereal 2 years ago from the nuclear meltdown area itself, right? And then removed restrictions for food for adults a couple of months ago. It's a whole different level of evilness. So they're targeting the children, obviously. Other products more prone to radiation contamination, like mushrooms, everything's prone. Mushrooms is the worst thing you can eat because it bioaccumulates. It has this unique principle where it really does bioaccumulate an absurd amount of radiation. Wild mountain plants and freshwater fish are still subject to various restrictions, but we can grow food in the actual 1-ton bags of waste and they're okay. There's no logic. It's like going to another planet and reading the news and going, well, this is weird. Are they all idiots or something? No, they're really smart. They have amazing education. They're just monsters. They don't even know what it's like to be a human. They were never a human. Their parents weren't, and their parents weren't. Harvested in forested areas where there has been a little decontamination work. Well, decontamination doesn't work unless you pick up the whole country and put it in a repository, not bring it somewhere else and grow food in it. Meaning high levels of radiation may remain. What do you mean may remain? How can you say something like that and call yourself a human? How does that actually work? Like, we've been at this a long time, and it's hard to imagine these people are people. If they were an alien race, I'd get it. You know, well, they're aliens, so what do you expect, right? But they look like humans, but they don't have any of those attributes, do they? Should radioactive soil from nuclear meltdowns be used to grow food? And, you know, if everybody had said yes, that wouldn't even surprise me today after reading Japan's latest story. I don't know if anything will ever surprise me again. Fukushima farmers battle stigma to win back consumers. Battle stigma in a nuclear wasteland. Stigma. Well, at least to put their name on the story for a change. Fukushima is an agricultural prefecture. Well, it was. Now it's a disease factory. But 10 years after the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear accident, growers are still struggling against lingering stigma about the safety of farm products from the nuclear meltdowns. The twin backbones of Fukushima's thriving sake industry are its pure water. Well, there's no such thing as pure water in Fukushima Prefecture. Not even deep aquifers can escape this. The once sterling image of the prefecture's agricultural products has been irreparably tarnished. Not that it matters, you're just going to grow food there and ship it away. This cracks me up every time I see it. 1 ton bags of radiation, and they're putting a greenhouse together. And it's just hard to reconcile that that's actually happening. Tarnish. Countries around the world are blocking imports of product from the area or even from Japan as a whole over safety concern because, you know, the evidence is pretty overwhelming. I can bore you with the numbers all across Japan. The whole country is just shocking. But Fukushima Prefecture, 1.4 million becquerels a kilogram for excrement from worms. The whole prefecture is shot. It's a nuclear wasteland, the whole bloody thing. And 14 prefectures. Not just Fukushima, it's 14 prefectures. The meltdowns at the disease factories, these fears continue to impact communities across the nuclear wasteland. They're all murderers. Anybody that participates in this is a mass murderer, is a serial killer. Japan officially has more serial killers than any other country. A bit further than the Hokkaido region's most populous city is Sendai in the nuclear wasteland known as Miyagi. And nevertheless, they had their products shunned. Of course they did. What are you growing food in a nuclear wasteland for, retard? And subjected to restrictions simply by merit of being within the boundaries of the prefectures. That roils me, man. There's evil and then there's nuclear. And nuclear is batshit crazy. Does that... These are 14 prefectures that are radioactive. $14. And the radioactive fallout wasn't restricted to Japan, unfortunately. This is a 16-day model from France. When it stops, it's 16 days later. It's the model is based on ventings, not based on the inventories from the meltdowns themselves. Bummer, right? British shops to sell radioactive baby food and other products from Fukushima under EU plan. That's 2019, folks. So you're going to sell baby food from a nuclear wasteland and cereal and breakfast cereal. Who eats the most breakfast cereal? Children. Who eats baby food? Children. Are children immune to radiation, Dana? No. Do they bioaccumulate the radiation? Yes. Are they attempting to kill the children and harm the children? Yes. Will they succeed? 100%. So I guess that's it for this planet, right? Might as well write it off and enjoy the time you got left. Or you can be stupid like me and fight back. Current plans do not allow for the contaminated products to be labeled. So Britain refuses to label the product, the baby food, and the cereal. But they do it with all the other cereal. And they do it for 3,000 ingredients, but not for Fukushima, not for radiation. But it's not illegal to poison you. Otherwise, they couldn't do it in the hospitals, right? There was a weird terrorism case, and they wanted to dismiss it because it's not illegal to poison somebody with radiation. Whoever that poor bugger is, they're being poisoned big time. You're looking at an absurd amount of poison. Look at the cowards. There's an absurd amount of radiation. They're going to just chop it up and grow food in it, though. That'll work. Farmer plows own anti-radiation furrow. So ditches to stop the radiation from coming into the crops. That's probably as stupid as you can actually get. It's hard to imagine there's somebody actually stupider than that person. This story kind of tells it all. Temporary radioactive soil storage site hinders the farmers. Well, that's not true. It didn't hinder that farmer. Farmers harvesting rice right alongside of 1-ton bags of radiation. Didn't hinder him. But he's being stigmatized. People are claiming his food is radioactive because he's growing it in a no-go zone surrounded by 1-ton bags of radiation. But if you think that that farmer is harvesting poison food, that's a crime because the farmer has more rights, see? But you didn't know that. The Environment Ministry estimates 22 million cubic meters of contaminated soil will be generated across the Fukushima Prefecture. Well, the Fukushima Prefecture, by the way, is not the only prefecture that are picking up 1-ton bags. And it's over 30 million in 2015, so... Local farmers are worried about prolonged reputational damage. We should have a letter campaign to write to farmers and say, we stand with you. You should be allowed to poison everybody worldwide. What do you need to keep up the good work? United Nations will donate for that one, I bet you. McDonald's Japan expands rice burger menu in a nuclear wasteland. This will warm your little heart. The 3 burgers rice come entirely from farms in Fukushima Prefecture. So if you can't get rid of the 1-ton bags and the rice that's grown in it, well, McDonald's is here. They got your 6. Back to 2019, Japan expects the World Trade Organization to lift South Korea's ban on Japanese seafood. So South Korea put a ban, not just seafood, and they shipped back 6 million pounds because it was so radioactive, by the way. But not just seafood, it was also normal food. So Japan took, and that's not the only ones Japan done this to, but Japan took them to the World Trade Organization, United Nations, to try to force them to lift the restrictions so they can poison everybody in South Korea. Because one thing about Japan is they're not racist or bigoted or biased in who they're going to poison. So Korea's World Trade Organization appealed the World Trade Organization application from Japan and succeeded. And it took about 1.5 years or something. So Japan doesn't have to. Or South Korea doesn't have to take food, but Japan was trying to make the World Trade Organization force them to take food from the nuclear wasteland. We got Mike Shell on the phone from Ontario, Canada. Hi, Mike. How are you, sir?
Oh, David, how are you, sir?
How are you? You got something you'd like to share with everybody, maybe?
Yeah, someone in chat said that they're in the USA, I believe, and they bought some food that was labeled that the rice in the food was grown in Canada.
Yeah, they were shipping it to Canada from Japan, relabeling it, and then shipping it to other countries.
I mean, we have like some small wild rice, but that's very expensive to harvest. I mean, it's almost impossible that is actually was grown in Canada.
Yeah, no, I didn't see it. I'm not paying attention to the comments, unfortunately. I've been at this all day. I'm pretty burnt out, and once the show starts, I'm usually pretty good. And
The show is rocking, man.
Yeah, it's crazy. Betrayal on humanity to do what they're doing. And anything else you want to throw out there, Mike?
No, that's pretty much it.
Okay, my friend, thank you. I'll have to look for the comment
Have a good
after.
night.
Yeah, good stuff, my friend. Thank you. That's Mike. I don't know if Mike is ever in the chat room. I think he used to be in the chat room quite a while ago. And it could be in there, I don't know. I'm not able to keep track of it tonight. And sometimes I get off my games when the phone rings, right? Not tonight, thankfully. Hopefully. So, Japan took the World Trade Organization, or South Korea to the World Trade Organization to force them to take the radioactive food from Fukushima. South Korea, and they won. Then South Korea appealed that, and then South Korea won. And Japan was not happy. South Korea won the bulk of its appeal on Thursday and disputed the World Trade Organization over import bans, testing requirements it had imposed on radioactive food from the nuclear wasteland. Now, Where's it to? The appeal looks solely at the panel's interpretation of the World Trade Organization's rules without going into the facts about the level of contaminants in Japanese food products. So they didn't look at the radiation, they looked at the interpretation of the rules. Or what right level of consumer protection should be. So they didn't look at the actual issue of why South Korea was banning it, the fact that it was radioactive and they were able to prove it. It is regrettable that Japan's claims were not accepted. The Minister of Agricultural, Forestries and Fisheries from Japan said in a statement, adding, Japan will continue harassing South Korea to abolish the trade restrictions. So they're not giving up anytime soon. And Japan plans to ask 23 other countries to have restrictions on deadly food from a nuclear wasteland, telling them it is ensuring the safety of the shipments so they don't have to worry. And they got to worry. The last thing you want to do is trust Japan. Japan is a piece of shit. Japan launched its trade complaints in 2015, arguing the radioactive levels were safe and that a number of other nations had already moved restrictions, but that doesn't quantify the fact, that doesn't make the food by proxy safe. Like America and Australia had lifted the restrictions on a lot of the food, but not all of it. They done that in September 21st last year, the rest of it. They removed the restrictions. And the next day, EU done it. And then a couple of months ago, Britain done it. But Britain removed all restrictions on baby food and cereals, which are what children are going to eat each and every day, a couple of years ago. So evil is real, and it's scary real. Japan officially declared a no-go zone around Fukushima. This is April 22nd, 2011. Within hours of the announcement, so this is, let me give you some context. So this is a month and 10 days after the tsunami, a little over 5 weeks later. So everything is melted down, everything is blown up at this stage. So within hours of the announcement, a steady flow of evacuees rushed back to the homes, some have not seen for almost 6 weeks, to collect clothes, radioactive clothes and radioactive valuables before the order went into effect. After midnight on Thursday local time, anyone found entering the area without permission would be fined $1,200 or detained for 30 days, which is what Japan likes to do with people. Guilty or not guilty, they can detain you for 30 days. Previously, police had been unable to enforce the evacuation order for the zone, but now they could. So in other words, run away, and well, you can go back and get your radioactive material if you want to, but you got to leave right away. You got to have a police escort. None knows when, if ever, they'll be able to return permanently. The nuke plant's operator, Tokyo, which is not a decommissioned authority, has no experience, should never be at it, says it will take up to 9 months to bring the radiation levels down and stabilize the reactors that don't exist anymore. The authority's chief concern is the accumulation of radioactivity in areas near the plant where livestock have been left to die, and the contaminated bodies of an estimated 1,000 people remain uncollected. So there was 1,000 bodies in the open that were too radioactive for anybody to go near. Workers evacuated from Japan nuclear plant again. Authorities report that workers, and what was the date on that? March the 21st, this is 6 days after the last explosion. Authorities report workers were close to connecting power supplies This is a whopper and a half. Bear with me, I gotta set that up better. Oh, the maniacs. Well, the only good thing about nuclear is, they're going to be super evil no matter what it is. What's the worst case scenario? Well, that's what they're going to do. I'm just looking for the original pictures. Here we go. I got to sear this into your mind. So think about this statement. Think about these buildings. They're complete. These were 190-foot buildings, 150 feet wide. They're completely destroyed. So they're working to connect power supplies to the 6 units last week to restore cooling and control systems to something that don't exist anymore. The power company told the monitors that the cables have been connected only to the reactors in building 1 and 2. Of course, that's impossible because they both melted down and liquefied. And said they were expected to reach reactor 3 and number 4 soon and connect power to it. So does anybody looking at that believe they're going to connect power to it and get it working properly again? How about that's reactor 4 and 3 that they're going to connect power to? Of course, the lies were consistent and right from the beginning. TEPCO, which is not a decommissioning authority, has no experience, don't build the plants, therefore they can't fix it, said it still needs to inspect pumps, motors, and other machineries before it can restart the buildings that don't exist. So that was the first couple of weeks, right? Here, but this picture here. Do you think this is the stump of reactor 3? 2/3 of the building is gone. So you think they're going to connect power back up to that? I know you don't. If you're human like me, you don't. The government has advised residents of Lydia not to drink the tap water, but maintains that none of the contaminated food or milk poses an immediate health threat. Well, when you say the word immediate, because radiation in these kinds of quantities takes a while to manifest and be diagnosed. But there's 1,800 illnesses, so that's not necessarily 100% true. You can get a heart attack right away from eating too much of it. Radiation near Japan's plant's tanks suggest a new leak. Tanks. What's the date on this? This is Martin Frackler. I used to play a clip of him, right? So and just had this clip was like, so what do we do? Do we tell the truth? Do we cover it up? Do we do this? Do we do that? But when he said, like, do we cover it up, the way he said it was, here's your options. Normally we cover it up, so do we cover it up? And who's we? Just a group of them, right? 430,000 tons of contaminated water in 2013. And they got 1 million tons today, and they're pouring water in there all day, every day, Dana. Well, they're lying to you. You can't pump the water. Once it goes over the reactor core, you're not going to pump that back up. Like, this is lethal doses by the liter now. So imagine a gallon of it. If you take a gallon of it and put it at a subway and everybody that walks past it dies that day, it's that kind of lethal. And do that every day for 1 million years. TEPCO must draw off the water to prevent it from overwhelming the jury-rigged cooling system that keeps the reactor's melted cores from reheating and melting into the ground in a phenomenon known as the China syndrome. No, well, you can't draw the water. You can't get near the building. It's a lethal dose. Japan's nuclear crisis, U.S. announces evacuation option. That was March the 17th, one day after Reactor 3 exploded. After reports that some spent fuel rods at Japan's Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant may now be completely dry. Spent fuel rods. The U.S. Embassy on Thursday urged Americans to get at least 50 miles away or within 50 miles to relocate and announced it would help them. And the recommendations followed U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission Chairman Gregory Jaczko testimony to a congressional subcommittee at which he warned that radiation levels were very high and said the organization believed that all the water in the spent fuel pool at number 4 reactor likely run dry. And of course it did. The spent fuel pool is at the top of the building. And the right-hand side, the depictions, the two reds are the two fuel pools. And because you don't have a repository, both of them are stuffed. The building to your left is the remains. You can see all the guts hanging out of it. You're not going to get up there and walk around. It's a lethal dose everywhere. So the spent fuel pools obviously went dry, caught fire and blew up and blew up and caught fire and blew up. And throughout the day, helicopters dumped water on the reactors at the crippled plant and fire trucks prepared to spray the building with high-pressure hoses. The reactor needs 4,500 tons a minute. It needs 1 million gallons every minute. And the reactor was already blown up. When they were trying to do it, this is what it looked like. TEPCO announced it to begin work to restore power lines. So the cooling systems at the destroyed facility that don't exist, try making that up on your own. How are you going to record cooling systems to something that's completely destroyed? How does that actually work, I wonder? Without water, the rods in the uncontained pools will heat up and emit a large amount of radiation. Well, they'll catch fire and they'll detonate. They'll create hydrogen gas and they detonate and it looks like that. That's the stump, the remains of Reactor 4. It was a 190-foot building. If that was your 190-foot building and somebody sent you the pictures and said, I got a few problems, you say, no, it's destroyed. Without water, the rods will heat up. Very high radiation levels at the plant are making any work at supplementing the pools inside the buildings extremely difficult. No, it's impossible. The pools don't exist anyway. Meanwhile, partially melted down fuel in Reactor 1 and 2 still desperately need cooling. No, Reactor 1 had a detonation, and the next day Reactor 2 had a detonation. Next day, Reactor 3, Reactor 4, or vice versa. And the detonation was caused by the meltdown. And so the detonation was these pressurized reactors at 1,000 plus pounds per square inch going boom. There is no containment. That's why they detonated. Japan says high seawater radiation levels no cause for alarm. And just the date on that was March 22nd, 2011. It happened, that's for 10 days after the earthquake and tsunami. 4 days after the last detonation. Recent tests indicate higher than normal levels of radiation near beyond Fukushima's plant's grounds. A testing team dispatched by United Nations to degenerate International Atomic Energy Agency reported radiation levels of 1,600 times above normal 12 miles away. And constant exposure at these levels for 26 days would lead to a cumulative exposure of 100,000 microsieverts, which is 1,000 millisieverts, which is a sievert, which is 1/3 of a lethal dose. And these numbers is not going to be cumulative. This is not, it's not helpful to measure this in sieverts and microsieverts. It's becquerels, it's actual physical atoms, right? I got an explanation there I could use of little videos that explains that. This is Gordon, I can't remember his last name now, from Harvard University, I believe. We'll see.
And
yeah, Harvard.
In the US context, we think of REM, and I assume in the Japanese context, people would think of sievert. The fatal dose from whole body exposure, median dose is around 350, 400 REM, or 3.5 to 4 sievert.
Delivered pretty quickly.
Delivered over a period of hours, but in that case, death would follow over subsequent weeks. But that gives you an indication of the sort of hazard that you're concerned. So a few sieverts, if the dose looks as though it'll be more than 2 or 3 sieverts over a period of plume passage, for example, then you know that you're in a potentially lethal situation. Whereas speaking in microsieverts is not helpful.
At all. Not even a little tiny bit. It's a complete deceit. The best way to kill a planet is have a nuclear meltdown. The highly toxic substance, which is 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison, do not pose an immediate threat. Like you said, it takes a couple of weeks to kill you with a few hours exposure. You'll die a few weeks later. Your organs are melting and they continue to melt, see? It remains unclear where the higher levels of plutonium came from, really. Again, they're refusing to acknowledge that the buildings look like that. That's the stump of reactor 3 shortly after the meltdown started. It's stunning what we're talking about. It's catastrophic. And experts believe that at least some of it may come from the spent fuel rods at the plant or damage to one of the reactors. What was the date on this 10 days later, was it? Yeah, 10 days later. Look, the minute anybody in the know sees the picture, sees that picture right there, and this picture, any expert that sees that and sees this knows the fuel pools with decades of reactor cores, and there's 2 of them at the top of each of those buildings. They know they're gone. They're not maybe. There's no speculation here. And those pictures were available. But all I'm showing you is the blatant universities and worldwide medias and the heartbreaking betrayal. About 400 engineers have been working at the plant for weeks to restore its cooling systems and prevent the nuclear meltdown. First off, there's zilch, and I mean zilch possibility there's engineers there in that time frame. And I can say that because if you go into my playlist, you're going to see videos on, a series of videos on pictures that was released by TEPCO. There was 1,900 pictures, and we flushed out all the pictures. And there's zero possibility engineers were there. The people that were there, and there was very few of them, were wearing paper suits. The traces of highly toxic substances do not pose an immediate threat to public health. Now, that's quite... Back then, that was common, right? An immediate... No, but it catches up to you a few weeks or months down the road, see? It remains unclear where the higher levels of plutonium come from. Some may come from the spent fuel rods. Duh. Of course, that's where they came from. Let me keep going here. Measurements of water inside number 2 reactors suggest a possible fuel rod breach. There's zero possibility that they're getting up close or inside of reactor 2 to get a sample. It's zero. And number 2 was the only building that looked like it stayed intact. Whereas everything else is obviously destroyed. But don't get me wrong, number 2 liquefied. And up in the right-hand corner, this headline here, potential global catastrophe from Unit 2 highly reactive fuel could make Tokyo area uninhabitable. And so reactor 3 had mixed oxide fuel, which is infinitely worse than reactor 2 to your left. And decades of reactor cores and fuel pools in both of these reactors, and they're both completely gone. But they want you to think about reactor 2, because it looks like it's intact. Temporarily melted down temporarily. Radiation seems to come from fuel rods that temporarily melted down. Meltdowns are 9,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures. That's an amazing statement. It's an incredible lie. Kyoto News says high levels of radiation also found in a trench of water outside of number 2. Again, number 2 reactor. Were you sure it wasn't outside of number 4, number 3 right alongside of it? No. And number 2, Dana, and they'll show you a good picture of number 2, and everything looks hunky-dory. Hard cases. Anxiety over contamination levels within Fukushima intensified last week when several homeless were hospitalized after coming into contact with dangerous levels of radiation. In Dano, which should be publicly shot or hung, or preferably, we got to go back to the days where we burned people on piles of wood and then set them on fire. That's what we should be doing with everybody in the nuclear industry till they're gone. Because the betrayal is catastrophic for every species. I'm being polite compared to what the planet would be screaming if they ever wake up. After the company on Sunday mistakenly reported the radiation readings at the plant were 10 million times higher than normal. Washington was 450,000 times higher than normal, instead of 100,000 times, which was part of the cover story, right? Former Prime Minister Khan said Japan is on maximum alert, but plutonium fears may be overblown. Well, Khan didn't say that. His spokespeople might have said it, but Khan didn't. High radiation levels consistently stalled effort to fix the cooling system. At the multiple nuclear meltdowns. high-level radiation from reactor 3 and 4, I'm sure, and 1 and 2 in the common spent fuel pool, and reactor 6, and the spent fuel pools in these buildings did. Like, you can't fix the cooling system. Well, there's a couple, reasons. There's a couple of good reasons. Let me see if I can find it. Probably can't find it right now. Yeah, I gotta. My God, I got so much on my computer. Well, that's not a problem, isn't it? I got so much. I usually got that at my fingertips. There it is. Oh, I'll never find it. I done too good of a job backing it all up. Look at that. One more try though. I forgot all about that. Look at that. Yeah, no hope of finding it here. I gotta just quick collection. I'm looking for a picture of this tsunami running through the site. Because I had to format my whole system a while ago. I've never recovered from it. Maybe it's right there. Yeah, so that'll work. So you can see the tsunami running through the site in this picture, and which means there's all the infrastructure is ripped out for 680 kilometers of that coastline. So the numbers in the red are people that died. The yellow are the people that are missing. Yeah. Which is 680 kilometers of coastline. So all, up to 10 kilometers inland was ripped out into the ocean. It was 2,000 square miles, the size of Texas. So there's no way that they can hook up power because everything was ripped apart. There was nothing there. And radiation was everywhere because everything detonated. Plutonium used in manufacturers of nuclear weapons is said to be more dangerous than uranium used in most of the plant's reactors. Well, they named plutonium after the devil, but the biggest byproduct of radiated fuel rods is curium. And so, 244, you need lead shielding 20 times thicker than you do for plutonium. So, curium isotope is the biggest byproduct and the most dangerous, from what I've been able to find. Chief Government Spokesman Yukio Adano, my goodness, what a disgusting creature he turned out to be, said Tuesday the levels found in the soil at 5 locations near the plant's reactors don't pose an immediate risk. Yeah, because you die a couple of days later or a couple of weeks later. They're talking about outside the plant, right? Site. So it's completely dishonest, and the person doesn't have that background. He shouldn't have been speaking, and he never shut up for 72 hours. In one of his interviews years later, he said he never slept for the first 72 hours. He interviewed everybody worldwide and said, no, even if it blows up, there's not going to be any harm to somebody. The presence of plutonium outside the reactor core confirms there was at least a partial meltdown of the core from the reactor that uses MOX fuel. This is physics professor Kenneth Barish from the University of California. What a degenerate he turned out to be. The levels reported are quite low and do not pose an immediate health risk. Well, if I give you a pill and you dies later from the pill that doesn't have an immediate health risk, I'm still guilty. And so what he's doing there, he should be locked up for the rest of his life for putting out that kind of propaganda. Scientists are also pointing out that because plutonium is extremely heavy, the likelihood of it spreading across a wide area is less than that of uranium. You can put 2 million plutonium isotopes on the head of a needle, but you can't see it. Do you really think the fact that they're heavier than uranium is going to stop them from covering the entire planet? Neptunium, by the way, that decays to plutonium. But don't worry, I got plutonium here too. These are models from Japan's TEPCO's numbers put into a model. So the plutonium won't travel very far. He said, but you got to cover the whole planet in just a couple of weeks. If the fuel rods were allowed to dry out, there would be a large-scale release of radiation to the atmosphere. The minute the fuel rods are not covered by water, the zirconium cladding catches fire and burns at 1800 degrees. Then the pellets of uranium plutonium inside the rod are caught on fire by the zirconium. The zirconium reaction with oxygen is vicious. It's vicious. Meanwhile, 3 workers who stood in radioactive water at Fukushima plant for 2 hours without protection have been given a clean bill of health. They're exposed to levels of 3,000 millisieverts, which is 3 sieverts. So they would have died within a week or so. But the fact they were stood there for 2 hours means they're going to die within 4 or 5 days after they got out of the hospital. They wouldn't lie to you. That's all they would do. Telling the truth is not an option. And it's really weird because the lie in the industries are so well known. When you go to school in the nuclear industry, you got to learn to tell certain lies. So this is a good example right here. So this was Simon Fraser University in British Columbia, Canada. Now he's going to say living next to a nuclear power plant is less radiation than sleeping next to somebody. And the audience can't hold back themselves and they blow up laughing. And the question is, how did they know to laugh?
And living next to a nuclear power station can actually contribute less than your loved one when it comes to... with myself as one of the principal investigators, was awarded $6 million.
But anyway, the claim you get less radiation, more radiation sleeping next to somebody you do from living next to a nuclear power plant, and everybody blows up laughing. This was April 11th, this was 1 month after Fukushima, and it was about the Fukushima nuclear crisis, separating fact from fiction. And then he put up all of these are fiction that he got alongside him. These are all the industry's go to for downplaying man-made radiation. I'm surprised you didn't mention The Simpsons in that, or bananas or potato chips. It's really shocking and quite disturbing that people can do this. I think I got a new Geiger counter. Takes a while to figure it out. I don't know nothing about it. The one that he got. From the time since the disaster, the government has permitted a foreign medical team to enter the country to treat victims. So this was the 28th of March. Say 2 weeks after the reactors were detonating, the health minister, 2 weeks after the nuclear meltdown started, had finally lifted a ban on holders of foreign medical licenses from practicing in Japan, allowing a team of 53 medical aid workers from Israel with 11 doctors and 7 nurses to work. So when they needed the doctors most, they refused to let them work there from a foreign country because they might report back, right, on radiation. So they let all the people that they could have helped, which would have been in the thousands, suffer and die rather than let them go in and see the radioactive fallout or go in and get radiated themselves during the worst of the worst. Radiation measurements from a pool of water inside of reactor 2. Well, you can't go inside of reactor 2, and you didn't. Suggest the fuel rods suffered a partial meltdown in Dano. What a despicable person he turned out to be. Just terrifyingly despicable. The water is the most contaminated found plants so far. This is absurd to suggest it was. You got multiple fuel pools detonated and ejected. The assemblies full of fuel rods all over the place. Workers continue to remove the contaminated water from the reactor building of reactor 2, which is the only one that looks like is intact in the first 4. The priority is to ensure it doesn't seep out into the soil or the sea. Meanwhile, they're worried about something seeping out, and this was the radioactive plume. This model is only based on 20 days. And so they destroyed their own country for a stupid paycheck in the hopes of the nuclear industry surviving it. And the worldwide nuclear industry participated in it. There was 2,000 students in Taiwan, nuclear students, that were told to get on the internet and challenge the facts by claiming it was like a banana and a potato chip and walking in the sunshine and stuff like that. 2,000 nuclear students. It came out in the Taiwan media a few years back. TEPCO apologizes on Sunday for the mistake in reporting a radiation spike 10 million times above normal. TEPCO. Well, they got their marching orders. It was 1 trillion times normal in Tokyo. TEPCO said a worker taking a reading, and Canada got a study. Canada had a study that was 20 million times normal. And Ottawa had another study that was 220 million times normal. Do you get what happened? No time to confirm a second reading because the radiation levels are so high you had to leave the area, and that's why TEPCO. So Japan's nuclear watchdog says level of radiation in water near reactor 2 again. Confirmed at 1,000 millisieverts, which is a sievert. The smokestack was 25 sieverts. But this was just a lie that they were originally telling me. There was a lot of them, right? The radiation levels are so high, emergency workers in their contaminated water would have received 4 times the maximum annual dose. No, this is man-made. This got nothing to do with natural stuff, which is what the annual dose is based upon. They told so many lies, they probably couldn't keep them straight, see? Emergency workers now switch to using fresh water as a coolant rather than seawater. What was the date on that? 28th of March. Well, there's zero possibility we're using fresh water on the 28th of March. It's zero. It's one, and the fresh water is being pumped in so that contaminated radioactive water can be extracted. And there was zero possibility that you can do that. The fuel rods were blown all over the site. It was a lethal dose to be near the reactors. And there was zilch possibility that you're going to put it in the tank because you can't get back on the site if you put it all in the tank. The despicable United Nations Nuclear Energy, the International Atomic Energy Agency, has warned the crisis could go on for months / a million years. Give or take 10,000. The government in Tokyo has said the airborne radiation around the plant is decreasing, so there's no need to extend the evacuation zone, which again, Tokyo was, just after a rainfall, was 29 million becquerels a square meter. But I'm just showing you these lies that originally came out. It was really something. Japan's other health crisis. Workers at the nuclear disease factory are exposed to dangerous levels of radiation. And parents in Tokyo are told not to give contaminated tap water to the babies. That the tainted milk, fruit, and vegetables are subject to export bans. They're not tainted, they're radioactive. There's a big discrepancy in those two words, see? That wasn't enough. Today's reports of soaring radiation levels at another reactor at the Fukushima Daiichi atomic power station served as a reminder the Japanese nuclear crisis is far from over. That's the 28th. Repairs to supply routes and the steady stream of aid and volunteers have eased food, water, fuel shortages for some of the 250,000 people enduring freezing, cramped conditions in thousands of shelters in the disaster zone, which is also a nuclear wasteland. Anne Freeman, nuclear horror has only begun in Japan. The news is full of people wondering why Japan would build nuclear power plants near fault lines and reach the tsunami waves. And over the last week, the world has watched in horror as the earthquake tsunami caused disaster at Fukushima, they built it in a vulnerable spot where they knew they were going to have that tsunami and that earthquake at some point unfolded. Sadly, it takes this tragedy to awaken a whole new generation of people to the terror of nuclear power and remind the rest of us who seem to have forgotten our nuclear ghost. Even President Obama just called for an expansion of nuclear power programs as part of his environmentally healthier energy platform. So, what a betrayal. An article on March 20th, this is the 21st, the day before, an article in the New York Times, Lessons from Chernobyl, paints a haunting portrait of Chernobyl today. Most frightening is the tons of very highly radioactive materials that live beneath the plant. 200 tons of melted fuel and debris burned through the floor and hardened in one spot into the shape of an elephant foot. Well, when you look at it, does that look like 200 tons to anybody? And you can't take a picture in that environment, and you can't survive it, by the way. The mass remains so highly radioactive that even degenerate scientists cannot approach it. And all kinds of media is showing you that picture. And that's not real, of course. That's Photoshop. Let me see, I got something here. Just give me a second. Or 2 or 3, okay. Okay, so you take that picture, you darken it up, and then you can put me in there. Here I am at Chernobyl, looking for worms to go fishing so they glow in the dark. So that's all they done, they photoshopped it. In comparison of Chernobyl and Fukushima,
fact that the reactor in Japan is 100 times more powerful than the one in Chernobyl, and
there's 100 times more powerful than the ones in Chernobyl. But so, like, telling a lie, that's what media does. Telling the truth is what they don't do. Remember, the consequences of this won't fade with the next news cycle or the one after that or even after that. It's just the beginning. Japan's earthquake, this is March the 14th. Authorities race to avert nuclear catastrophe. A frantic effort is underway in Japan to avert a nuclear crisis after officials warned on Sunday that the hydrogen inside a second reactor at an atomic power plant damaged was at risk of exploding. TEPCO, which shouldn't exist, particularly when there's a meltdown involved, it should have been Westinghouse, should have been nuclear academics or nuclear scientists, right? Not confirmed that the Fukushima Daiichi power plant's number 3 reactors lost its cooling functions, possibly leading to a partial, again they said the word partial meltdown at the number 1 reactor. Well, this is on the 14th, right? The explosion number 1 blew the roof off its outer building. No, it was a meltdown. The fuel pool blew up. It burnt continuously for several days. And similar fate awaited Reactor 3, and I showed you lots of pictures of that earlier. The government's top spokesperson in Dano, Yukio Dano, said Sunday the radioactivity levels near Daiichi plant, nearby Fukushima Daiichi plant, where 3 more cooling systems for reactors failed, posed no threat to the human health. Which is a blatant lie, right? Still, he couldn't rule out the possibilities of a second explosion. He said if there is an explosion, however, there would be no significant impact on human health. So, he should have been kicked out of government right away. If there was an explosion, however, there would be no significant impact on human health. The action was placed at level 4, an international scale of 0 to 7. The firm said number 1 reactor partially melted. No, it was 100% fuel pools, which Chernobyl never had any fuel pools because it was a new reactor. Screening centers were being set up on Sunday for people worried about exposure. Around 140,000 people left the area while authorities prepared to distribute iodine to protect people from radioactive exposures. They actually raised the limit 70 times higher than the World Health Organization had for children. Radiation exceeds the legal limit, TEPCO said. Radiation levels at the plant exceeded the legal limit. Hourly radiation at the site was measured at 882 microsieverts. This is absurdness. We now know that just the skinny stacks were 25 sieverts at the base. Outside of reactor 1 was over 1 million sieverts. 3 is a lethal dose. There is no confusion at this point, although we appreciate that people will have to leave their homes and livelihoods behind. There is no panic, and that's exactly what was there, was panic. Radiation spread in Japan after new blast and fire at the nuke plant. Large amount of radiation leaked into the air after third reactor at the atomic power plant experienced an explosion. The fort caught fire Tuesday morning. Prime Minister Nato Kan announced radiation was spreading from 4 reactors at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. Engineers battled to bring overheating reactors under control. No, when these things blew up, you don't go near that again, period. It's a lethal dose. These are medusas at that stage. Radiation was spreading from 4 reactors across the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. Levels seem very high, and there's still a very high risk of more radiation coming out. Yeah, for the next couple of thousand years anyway. A single Japanese official warned that radiation levels were now high enough to pose a medical risk. Now, there were lethal doses in the plume coming through. That's why 3,000 people died. They said it was from stress, but we've never seen thousands of people die from stress, from evacuating, typhoons and cyclones and hurricanes where millions and millions evacuated. We never had that. Even anybody accused of dying of stress. But at Fukushima, there's 3,000 of them. They died from the radioactive lethal plumes that came through, see? Plant operator, the degenerate TEPCO, told the disgusting BBC that radiation levels around Fukushima for 1 hour exposure rose to 8 times the legal limit. Again, right? This is a ludicrous, because look, it gets in you, it's pulsing energy, your body attacks with white blood cells for the rest of your life. At the site itself, you're talking about lethal doses from long distances. Statement posted on Facebook by the U.S. Commander Naval Forces in Japan says instruments on the George Washington is docked for maintenance south of Tokyo were picking up levels of radiation. Statement avoided the Navy personnel to limit outdoor activities and secure ventilation systems. He later came out and said it was around 1,000 times above normal, far past Tokyo, south of Tokyo. And Fukushima is north of Tokyo by about 200 kilometers. The latest explosion was thought to be at number 2 reactor, and the fire at the number 4 reactor was not operating but was storing spent fuel, but had half a reactor core in its... they took out half the reactor core to change the fuel, see? That's all you take out at a time. And that blew up. And I showed you those pictures. The 4th reactor was thought to have caused the increased radiation because the hydrogen release that caused the fire. And I understand when there's confusion. I just don't understand lies. This is March the 15th, so that kind of confusion is acceptable, right? Because on those days, things are blowing up. So you're at the very beginning of it. But the minute you hear the word Idano, you know he's going to be regurgitating lies from the nuclear industry. Idano said the 4th reactor did not pose an imminent threat. The 4th reactor was reactor 4, and that was 100% with 2 fuel pools that detonated, full of decades of reactor cores, hot cores. It's the same thing as the running reactors, no different. AP quoted a government official saying that wastewater in storage pools for one of the damaged reactors may be boiling. And you got no way to put water back in. Which means everything was overheated, which meant that it lost water. The zirconium cladding caught fire at 1800 degrees. Then the fuel pellets caught fire, which meant the water boiled. That's why the water was boiled. Most of the 800 workers at the plant were evacuated due to fears of exposure to high levels of radiation. Right, because there's all these little tidbits that define the truth like that. But 50 stayed behind, and there was like 1,000 Fukushima 50s, so 50,000 of them. 16,000 ran away. Stayed behind to pump seawater into the 3 reactors that experienced explosions to cool them. Well, the ones that experienced explosions, you weren't putting water back into it. You were spraying water at it so you can get pictures, but you weren't able to get close enough to it. Because you needed 4,500 tons a minute. The explosion already injured 15 people who worked at the plant, exposed up to 190 to higher radiation. Yeah, lethal doses. More than 500,000 remain homeless. Stock markets plunged in Japan across much of Asia Pacific regions on Tuesday. Japan takes desperate steps to cool the nuclear reactors. That's the 17th, the day after the last explosion. The United States gave a dire assessment of nuclear crisis and warned radiation levels at the plant are extremely high. Early reports said efforts to dump tons of water on Reactor 3, which reportedly experienced damage to its containment vessels during an explosion, had failed to bring down radiation levels. And Japan officials says they were hopeful the plant's operator, TEPCO, which is not a decommissioned authority, shouldn't have been in charge. It was fumbling, had no idea what to do. It was the worst decision humanity ever made, and should be hung by the neck until they're almost dead, and then let them recover and then hang them again over and over and over, as far as I'm concerned. Can bring power back to the plant. The plant is destroyed by day 17, on March the 17th, rather. They're not clutching at straws, they're giving you straws. The chairman of the U.S. nuclear straw man, right? The Nuclear Regulatory Commission told Congress he believed all the water in the spent fuel pool, the number 4 reactor, had boiled dry. Because that's such a strange statement, because if a fuel pool boils dry, it caught fire and released its entire inventory. The fuel is not just going to sit there. Right? It's an instantaneous meltdown. There we go. So 4 is to the left. So there's no way Jaco didn't know that. See? Bleeding radiation, which is a really interesting one, because I got emails asking me to use the word bleeding, and I sent the email back, go fuck yourself, right? Because you know what I'm like. But they're asking me to use the word bleeding instead of hemorrhaging into the ocean. We believe the radiation levels are extremely high, which could possibly impact the ability to take corrective measurements. Yeah, there is no corrective measurements. You lost the entire inventory. Chernobyl didn't have fuel pools. Fukushima, each building had 2 fuel pools full of 4 decades of reactor cores. He told reporters, according to AP, my understanding is there's no water in the spent fuel pool, which means you lost. Well, reactor 3, you can clearly see, is completely gone. And then if you look at the destruction of number 4 to your left, you can see that's completely gone, if you're honest. If the assessment of the situation is accurate, of course it was, and he knew those pictures existed, he's seen those pictures. He's the head of the non-regulatory agency in the United States. He would have known those pictures, right? He would have been aware of that. And he refused to say the fuel pools melted down. He just said they had no water. And so the average person is like, well, I don't know what that means. And anybody in the nuclear industry would say, well, it meant it blew up and caught fire and we lost the inventory and the whole planet is going to see mass die-offs worldwide because of it. Of everything, not just kids and species. Workers could then be forced to completely vacate the plant. Fuel rods and spent fuel pools would be left to melt down, which is exactly what happened. And if you go look at my series of videos on the pictures that TEPCO released, that's in my playlist, you'll see that's exactly what happened. After 2 fires, multiple explosions, radiation levels reached a point Wednesday where workers at the plant had to withdraw from the site. Well, a helicopter couldn't even dump water. Anyone within 20 miles of the plant should remain indoors with windows shut. As soon as the wind starts blowing towards Fukushima, you got to get out of your house and leave and never come back, see? Ideally, you're going to leave before it makes it to your house. That's why, like, the Limerick plant in the United States within 10 miles has 165 sirens. So if the wind's blowing towards the plant, you head that other way. The chief of the UN International Atomic Energy Agency planned to arrive in Japan on Thursday. Why did you wait so long? Not that he's going to go to Fukushima or anywhere near. He's not going to go within 100 kilometers of Fukushima. 450,000 are homeless, living in temporary shelters. Emperor praised for Japan's radiation halts work to cool the reactors. To avoid overexposing the homeless and destitute and victims of society, authorities were turning to the other option for injecting water to douse the reactors. Police have been asked to help using water cannons. However, an earlier plan to drop water from helicopters was scuttled. So going in with water cannons is the definition of stupid. So they can get pictures and pretend they got it under control. Sacrifice all the police. So over 300 police officers died. Emperor praised for Japan as radiation. That was March the 15th, by the way. The authorities are particularly worried about the fuel pools at several reactors, and the rods are radioactive, potentially as hot and dangerous as the fuel inside the reactors. Number 4, reactor pools lost some of the water needed to keep the rod stable. But if it lost some of it, it lost all of it because it would boil off. The rods are going to catch fire as soon as they're exposed to air. The company said the fire broke out because Tuesday fire, which occurred at the fuel storage pool of the same reactor, had not been completely extinguished. Well, you can't put out a fuel pool fire. I guess we'll just finish this story out and we'll call it a night because, well, I'm almost finished. But it's so important I don't want to skip through it, so we'll finish the rest of it tomorrow night. There's not that much left, but the French government on Wednesday told its citizens to leave Japan, warning that the situation at Fukushima was out of control. Not just Fukushima Prefecture or Tokyo Prefecture, but leave Japan. To leave Japan. And look at the victims. Claire! It's absurd. We got donation buttons in the bottom of the description. We're struggling. Just remind anybody out there that can afford it, we need to raise a bit of money. We're way behind the curve. And there's just 2 ways to donate. They're both at the bottom of my description, PayPal and literally any kind of card or bank card or anything at my site is all through legitimate organizations. We've been using them for years. We've never had an issue. I guess we'll call it quits right here. That's the wrong song. Or is it? I don't know. That's 2 hours, 10 minutes, right? Oh, thank you, James. Wow, you're amazing, my friend. You're a good man. Thank you. There's a bit of weight off my shoulder. Wow. So that's 2 hours, 10 minutes. That's a long enough show tonight, right? But I got probably 3 more stories, but I'm not going to get through them tonight. We'll pick up tomorrow night, those stories. I had a big show for today, but that headline showed up. And I had to cover that story tonight, right, where we started off with. How they're going to move the soil up by Tokyo and grow food into it. 2 days ago, they're growing it 2 kilometers away from the nuclear meltdowns in an evacuated community. So we had to do... And so I got a whole show ready to go. But I got a whole lot of these stories ready to go, too. That's the messed up part about this story. And who knows what tomorrow night is going to be, but it's probably going to be more of this because this is all fresh stuff for you folks. You haven't seen this before. We'll see everybody tomorrow night. Hugs for everybody. God bless everybody. Have a great night, a great day. I'll catch the comments after. I'm going to close the poll. How did we do on the poll? Should radioactive soil from nuclear meltdowns be used to grow food? Somebody said yes. They must have made a mistake, obviously. You got an overwhelming 96% said no. That's awesome. 50 no's. We'll see everybody tomorrow at same time. I was a little late getting the show up tonight. My apologies. It goes that way sometimes. Not very often. I'm usually a couple of hours in advance. And we only had an hour notice tonight. That's unusual for me. Get lost I was working right up until I posted because I had switched gears and decided to tell this story tonight instead of the whole whack of news that I gathered up over the last couple of days. And now I got tonight and the moral of news to catch up to, and which is good, right? We're ahead of the curve. So we're going to end the poll on 50 votes. If you make it this far, don't forget to give me a thumbs up. And Gar Woods says he's going to do oxygen testing too. And he's going to call in eventually when he gets the kinks out of it. Yeah, good night, everybody. Have a great night, a great day tomorrow. We got a mad show for tomorrow night. Take care, everybody. We'll see everybody tomorrow night.